So, as you can see, I have modified my Edward Kenway Assassin's Creed blade so that I can extend and retract the blade just with the movement of my arm. No wires, no rings, and no springs. And that's really what I wanted. I saw a lot of people do mods where they hooked up a ring to their finger to pull the trigger so that it would spring out, but you still had to shove it back in with your other hand. And I've seen one mod, actually it wasn't a mod, it was a custom build where they had it spring loaded both ways, but it's just way too complicated for me to deal with putting the time and effort into it, because I don't exactly know what I'm doing, so I didn't want to ruin it. So what I did, as you can see, and it's not 100% fail-proof, because of the material, if you leave it out too long, the blade will start to droop, and that makes it somewhat difficult to get back in. Getting it out is pretty easy. Sometimes it'll shift in an inch or so, fall down to there. But getting it out is pretty easy. Like I said though, if it starts to droop, then it might get stuck. You might have to give it a couple tries. Also, I found since there's no spring anymore, if you just lightly grab it and pull it back, that makes it go in. And even if it doesn't go in all the way, you can just tap it down the rest of the way with your finger. But if you don't have it out a lot and you just want to give it a quick, it usually works out pretty well. So I'm going to try to talk about how I did this. And again, this is for the Edward Kenway version. I haven't seen any of the other versions, but as long as the mechanism works the same, it should still work. So I'm going to try to show you exactly what I did. One other thing I want to point out before I start getting into it is that even though there's no lock, I disabled the trigger, so there's no button there anymore, and I took the safety out, so there's no lock, but you can wiggle it around quite a bit and it's not going to fall out. And I mean, even if you were running, your arms would be either parallel to the ground or facing upward, so I don't think there's a lot of chance that it would fall out. But when you want it out, as I said, it's not 100% fail-proof, but it's because I'm sitting down and I don't have a lot of momentum here trying to get it in the camera. There we go. When you want it out, it's out, but it's not going to fall out, at least not that often. So basically, the simplified version of what I did was that I took out the spring and I took out the lock, the trigger mechanism, and I also took out the safety. Taking those three things out is really simple, and the only thing that you're left with is that this button is going to be twisting around a lot because it's supposed to be screwed into the lock, and if that's not there, then this loses stability. So what I did was I took the spring out of that as well, and then I made kind of a really small, basically a washer with a paperclip, and stuck it in there so that the screw pulled it tighter so that it didn't come out and twist around. But if you wanted it still to be button activated, you could leave the lock in, or if you wanted to do the mod with the string, you know, you could do it to where the string unlocks it, and even if you take the spring out so that you can get it back in, that would lock it when it was in until you either push the button or use the string. But like I said, I didn't want to have to use a string and I didn't want to have to push the button, so I disabled the button completely, so it's just decorative now. But basically, you don't need this part at all for now. You've got 4 screws here, so you take those off. So once you take those screws out, this part comes off, and you're left with this, and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more screws to take out. Alright, once you've got those screws out, you want to take this casing apart, and it's probably not going to hurt to take these straps off. You don't have to cut them or anything. There's just another Velcro section, so you can stick them right back on later if you want to keep using them. And this assembly can be kind of tricky to get apart. But this is what I have left, and it's kind of awkward with my camera angle. I apologize for that, but yeah, it's not going to work. I'll just have to hold it up. So, don't knock my camera over. All I've got is the blade and the bottom chassis, and then I've still got the skull screwed in one hole, and that's where I put my little homemade paperclip washer. It's right underneath this screw, because otherwise there's so much space, since this is supposed to be a button, that it comes out, and it's supposed to be screwed in there as well, which is where the lock goes. So it gets screwed in there, which keeps it straight. But because I took the lock out, there's nothing to screw it into. So I just had to add a washer underneath that screw. And if you do that, you just got to make sure that you leave the channel clear. Because when I did it first, I had some bits of the paperclip sticking up still, and then when it slid back, it was getting stuck on those, so it wasn't coming all the way out. And I had to push it in, and then it didn't want to come out as easily. So just make sure that that's all clear if you add something there, so that this can slide freely. Alternatively, if you wanted to, you could always just glue this or something, you know, if you stick some hot glue underneath there and squeeze it down to where you can't see it, that would do the same thing. I just didn't want to do that personally, but that would probably be the easiest way of doing it, and then you wouldn't even need that screw in there. Unless you wanted it there as just in case the glue broke or something like that. But if this was fully assembled, then you would have this lock in here, right there. Sorry, I'm trying to do it to where you can see it. And that is what normally keeps the blade in. And then when you push the button, it pushes the lock out and release the blade. And you notice there's a notch on one side of the blade, and even without the lock, you have to make sure that that's facing, if you're looking at it down like this, it's facing at you, because the blade is not the same on both sides, and if you put it in upside down, it's not going to work. So that lock was there, and then the safety was there, so that when you flick the safety, it blocked the trigger mechanism so it couldn't activate. And then obviously the spring was in, which made it spring-loaded, and then this spring went in between this screw and the button, so that the button would want to stay out until you pushed into it. So like I said, I took out this spring, I took out this spring and added a little paperclip washer, I took out the safety, and I took out the lock, the trigger lock, because I didn't, like I said, I wanted to be able to just flick my wrist and have it come out. Now I have to push a button, now I have to pull a string, just do it whenever I wanted to. So if you do it that way, all you've got is the bottom chamber screwed into this button, or if you, like I said, if you want to glue it on, no other parts needed, and then you put it back together. I noticed in my testing that it worked a little better. For me personally, if I left the screws a little bit loose, you don't want to leave them too loose, because then the blade will just shoot right out of the guide, especially at the tip, because this is where the notches are that hold the blade to keep it from coming out. And if you keep those too loose, then the blade will just shoot right out and you're going to look foolish. But If you keep them all just a little loose, then it's gonna make it easier for it to slide in and out. Which, you know, if you had them all tightened up, it's not like it would refuse to come out. It would just be a little harder to get it when you wanted it to. So I'm going to go ahead and screw these all back in. Okay, this should go without saying, but just in case, make sure you're putting the screws back into the right holes. The screws that go into this part have no washer head, and you should have 6 of them. I have 7 because I took the one of the trigger lock out, and it's not in there anymore. And then the other screws that hold on the bottom leather part have a little washer head on them. So those 4 are here, and you don't want to screw into those yet. I just did that by accident, even though I did this like 20 times yesterday. So just be aware of that. So at this point, I would test it out, make sure that it goes out and it goes back in like you want before you screw everything back together, which mine does, so I'm going to keep going. Quick tip, because I just messed up again, you're going to want to put the straps back on before you put this part back on, because otherwise it's going to be more difficult. So, once you got it all strapped back on, you should be ready to go. Now, my camera's almost out of time, so we're going to add a couple quick tips here. I actually think it's more comfortable without this, but I think it looks better with it on. But either way, just make sure the straps are really tight. If they're not tight, it's not going to work. And lastly, if you can get it out, but not back in very easily, you can always just stab somebody with it, and that'll put it back in for you. So, hope this helped. Have a good day.